Welcome to Planet Poetry, the podcast for poets and poetry lovers. My name's Peter Kenny.
And I'm Robin Houghton. And in each episode, we interview a poet and ask them to share some of their work. Today, we're meeting Peter Daniels, who's going to be talking about his collection, Old Men, published by Salt in 2024.
And Robin's going to tell us about Leland Bardwell, an Irish poet not as well known as she might have been. And I'm going to talk about Timothy Gallagher, a writer of dramatic monologues.
Also, we've been up to London to the National Poetry Competition Awards night, so we'll give a little bit of a report on that. Let's hear what Peter Daniels had to say to Peter.
Peter Daniels is an award-winning poet and translator. He has published 4 poetry collections. Today, we're going to discuss his latest, Old Men, published by Salt in 2024. Peter has a creative writing PhD from Goldsmiths, has translated Vladislav Kodosevich from Russian, published by Angel Classics in 2013, and as a queer writer in residence at the London Metropolitan Archives, wrote the obscene Ballad of Captain Rigby. So, Peter Daniels, welcome to Planet Poetry.
Oh, thank you.
I feel like I've known you virtually for decades, but I think we must have maybe crossed paths many years ago, but it's lovely to see the whites of your eyes.
It was the Wooden Lambs in Chiswick. I can't believe I used to go all the way from Stoke Newington to Chiswick for an evening to do poetry stuff.
That's right, yes. Yeah. You were heavily involved with the Oscars, which was a real pioneering group of writers.
Yeah, I suppose we were. Yeah, the thing of being gay poets seemed to be important, and I suppose we were kind of bouncing things off each other as, just as poets, but somehow being gay together was important.
One of my best friends, Timothy Gallagher, was you collected some of his work into a collection which I just found on my bookshelves the other day, and just as I was thinking of contacting you, which is called Jugular Defences, which was quite an important collection at the time, I think.
I'm glad you think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we started doing proper book anthologies after we'd done a few pamphlets of, kind of collecting 3 people in a pamphlet. And in 1990, I did an anthology of gay men's poetry, and we did a lesbian one that came out at the same time.
Yeah.
I think Timothy's probably in that one as well. I mean, he was certainly coming to the Oscars for a long time. He was already part of it when I joined, really. And Jugular Defences was 1994, and, we just felt it was time to do an anthology about AIDS, really. By 1994, it had been going on for about 10 years and didn't really look as if anything was going to get much better at the time.
Yeah.
So it was a thing that we needed to do.
It's a time I remember very well because of Tim eventually succumbed to AIDS. That kind of whole period is quite sort of seared into my memory, really. That connection with you, actually, at one remove, it stems from a very heartfelt moment in my own life, So, Old Men, Peter. I find that through this book you have many quotations from my poetry pin-up, W.B. Yeats. How did W.B. Yeats help you access this subject matter?
Well, it was really because the way he approached old age, he really came to meet it. The poem, Why Should Not Old Men Be Mad, that kind of struck a chord. And yes, there were just things that I felt guided the collection a bit that came from Yeats.
I think it works so well. I love this idea of an aged man is but a paltry thing, but the idea of, soul's got to clap its hands and you've got to keep going somehow.
Yeah.
Didn't he have monkey gland treatment or something at some point?
Oh, yes, he did, didn't he? Yeah.
To boost his general libido.
No, I haven't had that.
So I'd like to ask you to read the first poem in the collection, which is called My Dirt.
My dirt. I have it in me. It's a speck of dirt that grows and lives on pleasure from down low, inside my dirty place. It likes that unholy fact. Lodged in the gland with piss, jism, cum, and the testosterone it feeds on, its nature is growth. The pressure of my joy enhances the effect. Contagious in its way, but not to you, strangely, though it's so dirty. Its filth is all its own, but it wants to be mine. The fruit is cursing the fig tree. It's part of me, but not mine yet, little enemy that makes unknown demands, but fulfills my demands on myself, my need to be victim. My dirty soul's expression. It belongs to me like a sullen servant to fuck me up, a peevish master to take me over, not because I'm a faggot, but because its wrongness is its character. Any dirt is matter in the wrong place, revealing the flaw in its purpose, like a bad vaccination. When will I know if I've left it behind me? When is there to know? It may need to be blasted from the inside out, bleached, scrubbed, vacuumed. This is speculation so far. It's there, but I don't know its intentions, or the negotiations still to come. Let's not talk now of defeat or victory.
This is such a great opening. Some kind of a journey that's not been sanitized. Perhaps it's the dirty truth, or, that phrase about getting the dirt on people.
I should clarify, maybe it's actually about prostate cancer, which I have a small amount of. I'm under what they call active surveillance. And the last time they measured it, it was 3 millimeters, and it hadn't really grown at all. So I think I wrote the poem when it wasn't quite so clear that it was being a very slow case. I mean, it affects my life in a way, but not all that much. Yeah. But it's just something there that you have to live with. It actually lives on testosterone. That's one of the things about it. So
the metaphor was of a prostate, really, lodged in the gland with piss, jism, cum, and the testosterone it feeds on. It's more than just a stain on an X-ray or a scan, isn't it? It also seems to be associated in this poem with vigour and meaning and so on.
Yeah,
Were you using it? You were using it metaphorically, I guess, as well.
Yeah, but it's also opening the book about old men with prostate cancer is just where you are, really.
Dirt kind of crops up, peppers the book.
Yeah, it does, yeah.
Can we read the poem Old Keys?
Old Keys. Old keys open strange doors where the dark dwells in the lock. Entering the front brings you through to the back, where the furniture is older and stranger. There's a thick brown varnish, chipped, you might imagine, by spurs of cavalrymen waiting to be undone, away from truth or whatever they fought for. Their own bodies asked to be betrayed, but they faced any soul unburdened behind those doors, overcome by the frantic power, with its affront to virtue passing unchallenged. Behind those doors the inner chambers gave out lessons in foreign manners, foreplay for friends to explore with each other's hands as lovers, a sovereign remedy for the nagging. This was freedom that mattered now, between the furnace and the ash pit, with the smoke and the heat burnt off in what they did overnight. In time, who could care, even indeed, over the infernal eternity in which they were expected to regret the door that opened them to this way of life?
Yeah, this is an amazing poem. This exploration of a hidden world. Even the dark dwells in the lock. You put the key in, but there's sort of darkness there, and you walk into this space. Curiously free as well, and, it's a sexual eroticized place too. I'm intrigued by the cavalrymen there.
Well, the poem itself really derives a bit from the time when I did a residency as a queer writer in residence at what was then called London Metropolitan Archives. It's just called London Archives now. Resulting from that, I wrote this obscene ballad called The Ballad of Captain Rigby, which is about this man who was prosecuted for attempted sodomy in 1698. So, it's got all that behind it as why I wanted to imagine what they were like when they were meeting. The spurs of cavalrymen, actually, it came from the Archers.
Really?
I haven't listened to the Archers for years and years, but I remember there was an occasion when Peggy Archer had a table restored, and she was very cross because they'd actually taken out these scratches from the table legs that she imagined were the spurs of cavalrymen who'd been sitting at her table. So somehow I couldn't resist putting that in.
There's something deliciously subversive about inserting the Archers into this. I love the fact that the cavalrymen are away from truth or whatever they fought for. That sense of this furtive, hidden joy going on. We were talking earlier about the Oscars. Have you, as an individual, found the climate in writing poems that are sort of openly gay? Do you feel like it doesn't have to be secret, have to be behind a locked door and so on anymore?
Well,
how's that changed?
It has changed. There's a huge amount of it around. Gregory Woods, I think, I remember saying it, but he may not have originated it, but this line about how the love that dare not speak its name is now the love that never shuts up. And somehow poetry has become a real vehicle for expressing, all the LGBT, etc. world and feeling and life. So there is an awful lot of it about, which actually makes it a bit harder to make any impression with it, because when it was a bit more dangerous and you had to push at the door a bit more, that was important. That was what the Oscars was about.
Because I remember at that time there was a certain kind of edginess to getting up in front of an audience and just being open about your sexuality.
Yeah, the edginess is still there, but I think it's not what it was. I can't quite put my finger on it. But
it's great that it isn't.
Yeah.
From a section in your collection which has this quote from W.B. Yeats in it, Sailing to Byzantium. An aged man is but a paltry thing, a tattered coat upon a stick, unless soul clap its hands and sing. The first poem in the section of Old Men that has that as its epigraph is called Unknown. Would you read that for us, please?
Unknown. Of all the unknown people pouring down the other escalator, one had to be the perfect soul partner never encountered, answering the call of the romantic dirt in his head. But never mind all that. He'd continue following whatever the gleam seemed to be. One day he could answer the door to a wheelbarrow, delivering his whole history, everything he'd seen or felt, and what was worked out from the evidence. Then he might understand what it was the wink in the street would have led to, what the idol of his kind was offering, who must, by statistical evaluation, have been for him the one answering the right question, if he'd thought of it.
That's such a London image. I stood so many times at the bottom of an escalator watching all the people flowing out of it. And each one of them is a possibility and an unknowable world. Where before, in Old Quays, there's all the cavalrymen and all kinds of things going on behind a locked door. This is dealing with the outside world, and what you get, a couple of lines, one day he could answer the door to a wheelbarrow delivering his whole history, everything he'd seen or felt, and what was worked out from the evidence. I like the idea of you're there watching all these potentials go past, and then, later on there's a knock on the door and somebody's piling out all these kind of parts of your life.
Yeah, well, this section of the book is particularly about the man who changed my life in the last couple of years. But it's got a few other poems that aren't necessarily about that. And I suppose it's opening the section is this perfect soul partner. I'm not quite sure if he is exactly that, but he's pretty much a perfect soul partner. And, just the kind of randomness of everything about how on earth do you meet these people? How do you actually get to where you're supposed to be?
What's your relationship with London? You did live in the US for a while, didn't you?
I had a year when I was spending some time in America in 1992. I had a break from my work, which was very nice because they paid me. And I went to Minnesota, to Minneapolis, to work on the James White Review, which was a gay men's literary review. So I spent some time there. That was good. But London is where I've lived since 1982. I grew up in Birmingham, and I'd kind of exhausted Birmingham a bit in 1982. And also, I qualified as a librarian, and there wasn't really very much in the way of work as a librarian in Birmingham particularly. And I realised that there were far more libraries in London than anywhere else. So I went to London to look for work.
London's really informed your work, though, hasn't it?
Oh, yeah, it does. I've lived in Stoke Newington now almost 40 years in the same flat. I can't quite believe that.
Do you feel like there's anything left of your Midlands upbringing? Or
Well, I've actually been getting more interested in Birmingham in some ways. On Facebook, I get a lot of pictures from Birmingham history groups and things, and I kind of look at places that I grew up in, either in 1910 or even in 1970 when I actually lived there, that kind of thing, you know. It's kind of coming back to me. At the same time, Birmingham is in such a mess. It's really destroying itself. But it always has been destroying itself. I mean, it was pulling itself apart in the 60s and building all sorts of rubbish, and some actually quite good modern buildings, which are now being got rid of as well. I don't know, it's a bit of a hopeless case, I'm afraid. There's a book of Roy Fisher's, it must be the one called Birmingham River, because he grew up in Birmingham, and he says, Birmingham's what I think with.
Yes.
I think that is. I think London is just as much what I think with now, but Birmingham's definitely there. It's, you know, when I switch back to it, it's all there.
When we talked to Ian Macmillan, he said that Barnsley was what he thought with as well, sort of adapting that.
Yeah.
Maybe we should read Empty Boxes.
Empty Boxes. A seashell has been emptied of its owner, but a box begins as itself with a need to enclose. Was Pandora's box purpose-made, or were those things shoved into something handy? The empty box is still somewhere, missing its ungrateful contents, holding only air. I have many lovely boxes, too lovely to fill, like these nifty cigar boxes, some plain wood, some fancy ones. The man who gave me them 40 years ago, he's been dead for 35. They screwed his box down tight, afraid of what they had to put away inside it. Finding new purposes for boxes takes luck and judgment for the size and shape they fit. Give me shoe boxes and toffee tins, containers too good to chuck. The shoes and sweets are elsewhere now, but Pandora's things will still be jostling us. They mock our boxes.
Well, I was very drawn to this because I love boxes too. But as soon as I start thinking of boxes, it all goes into a symbolic place in my mind. You know, there's a tension here between the emptiness of those boxes and the potential that they could contain things.
Yeah. I realised today when I was thinking about it that boxes and collecting boxes is like, it's a kind of gateway drug to hoarding, because you know you want to put things in them, and that means that the boxes that you've been hoarding already are going to contain more stuff that's going to get kind of piled up everywhere.
I see that as an invitation, really, those empty boxes. And because this is in a poem, there's mentions of Pandora's as well, that the emptiness could almost demand to be filled with poems or creativity, or you know, the fact that you still have these spaces that could contain things is almost a kind of thumbing your nose at being an older man.
Yeah, I suppose one thing about writing a lot of poems is that, you know, maybe one day they might have all been on paper, but these days it's all digital and it's not really taking up any space apart from the books that turn out in the end. You know, it's not like making pots. You know, you end up with lots of pots you've got to give away or just fill the house with. But one thing that's actually happened is I've started taking up patchwork. For a long time, I had this idea of all these old shirts that I was fond of that had gone at the cuffs and you couldn't wear them any longer. And I thought I want to hold on to them and I'll turn them into patchwork bedspreads when I'm old. And now I'm old and I've just actually started doing it properly. So, there's going to be a lot of patchwork filling the place eventually.
Could I ask you to read October again, please?
October again. Divorce is in the air, and nothing looks as wrong as it ought to. What's new? The neighbours say there's an owl around in the back gardens, but I haven't heard it. This year we've been stuck together too long, but then it's already too many years we've been stuck together. Trees are shedding, but only a little, and it's dark earlier now as October sets in, all as normal. Meanwhile, divorce is occurring, and each of us becomes more his own self. Now there's no hard rule against doing what comes and enjoying it. My other self, my cousin with the identical name, died a few weeks back, and today I found a photo that I don't remember taking. I used to joke with him that shaking hands should tilt the world while we merged into a whole new monster. My other self, the one inside me, starts to do what he wants. Does he care what other people want him to? Infection in the air everywhere that so far hasn't visited here. Neither of us shows any of the typical symptoms, so we keep on, stuck being who we are, in each other's way. And it's October in a different way from the way it was that stuck us together all those years ago.
There's a sort of mood to this poem which is really fascinating to me. The idea of a cousin with this other self, the cousin with the same name, dying, it seems to almost be like death of part of yourself.
Yeah, it is a strange thing, isn't it? And I mean, he wasn't a particularly near cousin. So I suppose, if you were first cousins, you obviously wouldn't end up with the same name, would you, somehow? He wasn't someone I knew particularly well, but he was always nice to meet.
The ominousness of divorce is in the air and infection is in the air. This sense of weary acceptance of the fact that change is going to happen, but there's also a sort of unflappability about it. There's no sort of panicked response in here.
Yeah, it was 2020, so that's why infection's in the air, and things just becoming unbearable one way or another. But you kind of somehow put up with it.
I want to make the case that there's a kind of heroic stoicism about this, the attitude of just, okay, all these terrible things are happening, but we're still carrying on.
Yeah.
There's a resilience to it I really like.
Yes, it is welcoming the change, really.
Later on in the book, we start to feel the influence of Cervantes.
Yeah, it's about living with someone who's beginning to act very oddly and being kind of codependent in the strangeness, really, until you just can't bear it any longer. Don Quixote was just so obviously the right kind of analogy. I'd never read Don Quixote, but I read it particularly for the sake of writing what needed to be written.
Don Quixote is the book I've read half of about 3 times. I'm ashamed that I've never completed it.
Well, the thing that you realise about it is how an awful lot of the time Don Quixote is really rational, and then he gets these needs to be this hero, and the rationality just disappears. While at the same time he can talk about it in a kind of rational way. It's so absolutely right, Anyway,
there's nothing worse than being really persuasive and mad.
Yeah.
Your second poem in the sequence, The Sally Forth.
Yeah. It's The Sally Forth. It starts with an epigraph from Don Quixote. Most happy and fortunate were the days when the bold knight Don Quixote of La Mancha sallied forth into the world. Such days of purpose, of great plans and opportunities. What vision, what passion, what good fortune! Such is the objective truth pursued by Don Quixote, that every moment will be a triumph of freedom. beauty and upright standards are affirmed. His style makes good the uninhibited effort. Sancho Panza has his back, despite his own back pain. He needs to ensure the project will be fruitful. His schemes will produce something, at least apples of isolation and plums of forgetfulness. The reformer of good practice, the maker of decisions that vindicate, overcome and fortify. Don't disturb his thinking. He has right and proper insight into what will take everything further. He's coming home safely now, held in careful hands, and the work he has done still has scope to be fertile. Recovery from his expedition may be painful, but he will continue his mission beyond what life can afford. This is the story. This is the way of life, a hope to rescue and a thorough storming of the fortress. There is, on the same page, there's this little thing that you refer to as a coda, which isn't particularly part of the same poem, but it just needed to go somewhere. Horses happen more than unhappening unicorns. Does that make the happening horse matter more?
That's printed on the same page as the Sally Forth. It's almost like one of those logic problems that you have to kind of go through each word and unhappening unicorns. Horses happen more than unhappening unicorns. I'm looking at the Sally Forth. It's good to see exclamation marks. There's several exclamation marks in this, and you think, gosh, that sort of manic glee of the Don Quixote character.
Oh, yeah, well, it's all part of that, really, yeah.
And why did you put that the horses happen more, little 4-line gnomic utterance there?
Well, I had two of those little things. One thing I've done over the years is, with poems that didn't work, I've sort of cut out bits that seemed to work. So I had quite a lot of those, and there were a couple that seemed to fit.
Well, Don Quixote on horseback, quite a bit. Yeah. Do you think of yourself as the Sancho Panza of the relationship you're describing?
Well, I suppose I did, yes. Because Sancho Panza is, he's kind of stuck with supporting this man. He's not completely sceptical about him, but he's obviously finding it rather difficult to keep up with all the stuff that's going on. And he's got his own plans to become, a sort of important medieval figure that Don Quixote has persuaded him is going to be. I don't think I got quite that far, but anyway. I mean, I don't want to be unfair to the man this is about, and I'm still actually on sort of good terms with him, but he lives a long way away now. I
think these poems are very affectionate. Can I ask you to read Across a Field?
Oh, yeah. Okay. There's a poem of Pasternak called Hamlet, which finishes up with this Russian proverb, really. Life is not a walk across a field. And quite often I walk on the marshes by the River Lee, and there's a bit of that it is just a field, really. It's not quite what you'd think of as a marsh. And you walk across it diagonally to get to the other end, and it's like the field that life is not a walk across. So that was what it started out from, really. Across a field. Sometimes it's the field across which life is not a walk. Sometimes it's the way home, but not yet. Picking blackberries as you go needs you to bring a plastic bag or a bucket to collect them in. Not that I mean to go on forever like this, but places are destinations only when you stop. Home is a point of departure, too. Nowhere is anywhere, and somewhere is where you are now.
I'm learning lots from that. I love this line about home is a point of departure too.
So it's like a kind of, I suppose, a bit of a mantra about what life is like. If I go to the marshes in blackberry season, I've got to actually take something to collect them in if I'm going to pick them. Well, I suppose I could just eat them all, but that would probably make me a bit ill, wouldn't it? because you get a bit compulsive when there's so many blackberries, which there are. Yeah.
So there's that sense of, the idea of having to prepare yourself for what's on your journey, as it were.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, I want to go to the last poem, Waiting in It.
Waiting in it. Waiting in it. This is not a room with a view, nor a room of one's own, nor a philosopher's boudoir. After the discoveries of where, the what to be, the how, the who, the when, the clay for the potter, I find my strength in a pure flow towards the light, making me able to shine a little better. A few imperfect gestures, a garden to sit in, a feather and a leaf as an example, a pattern. I wait here, listening, a hollow vessel, yet I enjoy an identity. I am a being. I am Peter.
I really like that affirmative ending, but we're sort of back with the boxes there, aren't we? I wait here, listening, a hollow vessel, yet I enjoy an identity.
Well, without actually saying it in the poem, this is really a Quaker poem. I'm a Quaker, but it's actually quite hard to write about that, I find. So It's all kind of coming a bit sideways. You know, it's about being who you are, but you're open to the whole of existence.
I've never been to a Quaker meeting, but I understand that a lot of it is conducted in silence. Is that right?
It is, yeah. Sometimes completely in silence, but quite often people do get up and say something that they feel kind of impelled to say. You know, you've got to feel that it's pushing you there.
I find my strength in a pure flow towards the light. There's something religious about that line.
The light is, that's very much how Quakers refer to God, or the equivalent of God if you're not actually a theist. It's the theology gets a bit sort of all-purpose sometimes, but the image of light is very important.
As you're flowing towards the light, Peter, what else is on the horizon for you? Now that soul is clapping its hands and you have to keep singing, what's the next thing?
Yeah, well, I'm occasionally writing poems. I think, having the book out, which is nearly a year ago now, tends to do a bit of a drawing a line under things, though I was actually writing more poems to the man who's changed my life, some that could have gone in the book if I hadn't already got the book ready. Having got into the patchwork, maybe, that's a kind of displacement activity from writing, but I did actually write a poem called Patchwork the other day. So they're kind of converging a bit. But one thing I do want to do is to do more translation from Russian, which is another thing that is quite important in what I've done. When I had a break from writing my own poems for quite a while, I found this Russian poet, Kotasevich, and I started translating him. And that was very important, and it was a very good exercise because, for one thing, most of his poems rhyme. Not all of them, but most of them do, and rhyme in Russian poetry is quite important. And so I was really making an effort to do rhyming translations, which is quite a challenge. Yeah. And so that was a very good exercise. It really exercised my mind in a way that just scribbling my own poems wouldn't have done. And I think I improved a bit as a poet technically, I think, after that. So I'd like to get back to some more translating Russian.
On that bombshell, Peter Daniels, I'd like to thank you very much for joining us on the Planet Poetry podcast.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Now, this was very interesting, Peter, because, I went to Peter Daniels' website to find out a bit more about him. And it's a brilliantly written bio, which starts by saying, when I won the 2008 Arvon International Poetry Competition, Book Brunch referred to me as a hitherto unknown poet. and then he goes on to list all the stuff he's done. He's won the Poetry Business Pamphlet Competition twice, I think. He's been commended in the National. He's published books galore. He's a translator. He was listings editor of Poetry London, done an MA and then won another competition, then got another book published. And it's just like this guy has a huge history, but he was hitherto unknown in 2008. So that says a lot. It says a lot, doesn't it, about the poetry world? Are we all that? Are we so, our memories are so short that we've got no time to even look a guy up?
Yeah, he's far too cool to actually suggest that he was galled by that. But the fact that little tiny detail emerges on his website is quite cool, I think.
It is cool. And he definitely came across as someone who's, he's got this laconic, wry, dry even way of talking about his work and his influences. And I rather warmed to that. It was different. and a bit humbling.
I sort of knew him a little bit decades ago, and we haven't really spoken since then.
That was interesting that you had that connection.
But his quiet persistence and, churning out lots of great work in the interim is just really admirable.
Yeah. I liked it because, even the book's title, Old Men, it kind of says it all, really. It's like old men have actually been excised, haven't they, from the world of poetry, it seems to me. It's not fashionable to talk about old male poets. They've all been kicked into touch and they don't win anything anymore. But people are sort of forgotten. And I don't know, that somehow seems wrong. I don't know. Why have we gone so far the other direction? Okay, it used to be all old white men that had the privilege and got published, but does that mean that they should all be forgotten and not referred to or read? I don't think so.
Things are just so absolutist. I completely understand the sort of course correction. Inclusivity, I think, is fantastic, but it shouldn't be like a retribution for...
That's right. Well, I think so. It certainly felt like a breath of fresh air to me. His first poem that he read, which was My Dirt.
Yeah.
Lots of things occurred. Every other word is my, me, mine. And it's all about me. And it felt like, is this an ironic kind of statement on the state of poetry today, all the solipsism and everything? I don't know. But I rather enjoyed it from that point of view, even though he said, it's about prostate cancer, of course. But I loved all the other meanings that were sort of flowing out from it, and certainly in my mind.
I think that poets sometimes try and appear, have a public image and express that through their poems so that they want people to think about them in certain ways. And actually leading off with a poem, My Dirt, it somehow, there's nowhere to hide there. You're going to get something that's real, and it's not, look at me, I'm so cool or interesting or different. This is the real stuff, Of course, I lapped up all the ghost of W.B. Yeats, sort of raging against old age.
There's some quiet rage going on. And I certainly felt, although it wasn't mentioned, and some of the poems he read, I couldn't help but hear commentary on a certain American president. I won't dirtify the people's ears with the name. Even in My Dirt, there's this thing about blasted from the inside and bleached out. And I think we can all remember that being a possible solution put forward for COVID at the time. And later on, there's one of the poems he read about the Don Quixote poem.
Oh, yes.
I thought could easily be another lambasting character forging his way, trying to sort of be remembered in history.
The Sally Forth, that was a kind of...
The Sally Forth, yeah.
It's part of a series, and it's couching a relationship that was clearly, or my interpretation is it was absolutely exasperating.
Yes.
But in an affectionate sort of way.
But what about this poem with the reference to the archers? I enjoyed that.
Oh, the...
Shipped furniture.
With the cavalrymen, the spurs.
Caused by the spurs of cavalrymen. What a lovely story.
That it was like a secret world, that is of eroticism and just an alternative, but you have to do it all behind locked doors and so on. You don't have to be Sherlock Holmes to work out what that was like.
Yeah.
Where that arises from.
Yes.
And it kind of prompted my questions about how writing as a gay man has changed, because he's had this long experience.
God, yeah. That was very interesting what he had to say, wasn't it? That he kind of accepting of the situation, but more or less saying, well, it's a lot easier. It's easier now to write about that, but it also makes it harder to be heard through the noise of What did he say? Someone called it the love that never shuts up.
Yeah, from the love that dare not speak its name.
Yeah. So it's harder to make an impression in that.
Also, why would I ask that of Peter? Because we've had other LGBT plus writers,
Yeah.
but I think it's just because I knew he's got this long engagement, and also with his, involvement with the Oscars that became the Oscars press.
Yes. So it sounds like he was pioneering, really, and that is
he was a quiet pioneer. I think I enjoyed what he was saying about being a Quaker as well. That I really liked that poem "Waiting" in it, which was the last one he read. But that sort of being in silence and being in the flow towards the light. But at the end of it, he says, I wait here, listening, a hollow vessel. Yet I enjoy an identity. I am a being. I am Peter.
It had a sort of ghazal kind of feel to it, naming himself at the end there as well, didn't it?
Yeah. There's something I really like about that. And the hollowness of the vessel, throughout the book, there's this talk about boxes and interiors and things that are hidden away and, locked rooms. And that poem where somebody is turning up with a wheelbarrow, kind of spilling out all the stuff he's done on his front door.
Yes, yes, that was great. The idea of this wheelbarrow delivering his whole history. And it made me think of today's concerns of AI stealing people's writing. And I just saw something this morning, some headline saying, don't let AI steal your memoir. And, someone else is going to have your memory, you're having your personality or stolen, possibly, your whole life's going to be stolen. It's funny what you said about the poem Waiting in it, because my reading of that, in the light of him having said about he's got this semi-dormant prostate cancer, was I thought, well, okay, it's a hospital waiting room. Hospital waiting rooms, they don't have windows. They're very sterile. They're very boring. They're lit very badly, as in that harsh blue sort of light. But then, and also, there's that line, I find my strength in a pure flow towards the light, making me able to shine a little better. And then there's talk of a pattern, a leaf or a feather. And I thought, that's having a scan. You're having a scan, you're being this light, this, machine is being directed at you in order to see what's going on and patterns appear. You look at a scan and if you don't know if you can't interpret it, which none of us can unless we're doctors, I suppose, it can just look like a pattern of nothing in particular. So that's how I read that poem.
Oh wow, yeah.
I love the way a lot of the poems that he read, I read them in different ways. Or I saw different meanings out of them than perhaps was intended or whatever. And I really enjoyed that. It really sort of got my brain working in a really good way.
I totally agree, and I think his poems are kind of multi-dimensional. And more than he would be comfortable admitting to, or, certainly in an interview with a geezer like me. But, but they have depth. But that poem Unknown, with the wheelbarrow, but, this idea of just waiting at the bottom of an escalator and looking at people and wondering if one of them could be his perfect soul partner. And, there's something passive and watchful, but also there is a mood to his poetry that I find very distinct, and I've really enjoyed it. It's not mainstream at the moment, but for me that's all the more engaging.
I agree, yes, and all the stuff about boxes and empty vessels, and I enjoyed that discussion that you had with him about collecting boxes perhaps as a precursor to developing a hoarding habit, because you've got to put stuff in them. And then he compared the act of patchwork, which he's sort of getting into, where you make a physical object, as opposed to poetry now, which is all digital. It's not sheaves of, folders, binders of poems. It takes up no space whatsoever. And I hadn't really thought about it that way. But yes, poetry, you could say, it sort of almost doesn't exist because it's on our computers, and, where is it? What is it? It's lost something by not being bits of paper, perhaps.
Or a quilt or something real. Robin, you've been reading Irish poetry again, haven't you? And encountering a woman that's been rather neglected compared to some of her contemporaries.
I have, indeed. Now, this is someone who is unknown to me, but at the risk of sounding like Peter Daniels' homepage, where somebody described him as hitherto unknown in 2008, when he'd already had decades of successes, I won't say she's a neglected or unknown poet, broadly speaking, but certainly unknown to me. And this is Leland Bardwell. And she was born in 1922 and she died in 2016. So a long life. She was quite late coming to being published, but then she had a prolific output of, I think, 5 collections of poetry. She wrote radio plays, stage plays. She co-founded a publishing collective. She co-founded a magazine. She was an editor as well as a writer, and she was a real character. So she lived quite a bohemian sort of scandalous lifestyle, scandalous in the eyes of her Catholic Ireland, I think. And she lived in London for a while, and she had 6 children by maybe 4 different chaps. And she just
I can imagine that rustling a few feathers.
Exactly. So she had this circle of writers and artists and people who kind of moved around her and rated her and published her. So for some reason, though, I've not come across before. So I got hold of her final collection called The Noise of Masonry Settling, and that was in 2000. Good title, isn't it? 2006. Yeah. And then after that, there was a big collected, I think. So it wasn't the last we heard of her. But I suppose another reason, perhaps, that she was not everybody remembered her was that she certainly championed the poor, those who didn't have a voice. She wrote a bit like, I suppose, Evan Boland, in that she wrote about domestic things. She wrote about her past and her family and love, and quite vital poems. You know, you read these poems now and they sound very contemporary. So I was very interested to find out about her and to read some of her work.
Yeah, I'd like to hear some.
Yeah, so I thought I'd just read a fairly lightish one. So this is a poem for poets to relate to, I think, because it's about being asked to write a poem on the occasion of a colleague's significant birthday, and the colleague being Eddie Linden, who I looked up. Apparently he was an Irish stroke Scottish poet, and that's important because that comes in the poem. And he was an editor. He founded the magazine Aquarius in London in 1969, and that went on until 2002, this literary magazine. So he was a kind of a champion of all the poets of the day, including Leland. So when it came to his birthday, clearly she was called upon. And one of the things that Eddie Linden, a couple of things we should know about him, that wasn't his actual name. He kind of adopted that. That was his stepfather's name. He had a different name altogether. He was a poet and a playwright. One of his key works was called Who is Eddie Linden? So it was a kind of an autobiographical play. So anyway, bear that in mind. So this poem is called Drum Up a Poem. Drum up a poem, they said, for Eddie's birthday, and me as empty as an upturned barrel. Who then is this Aquarius fellow, this Eddie Linden? Is he some sort of astronaut in the bend of the wind that poor folks like us remember, who did demons for us as we struggled to climb onto the empty page? Good luck, so. To the beat of your Irish, sottish heart, from this upturned barrel, I send you a drum of delight.
That's great. That's got such vigour.
I know, and from sort of heart, the beat of your Irish, sottish heart, I thought, oh, is that Scottish? No, Sottish. I think in the early days he was known to enjoy a drink. And even the word drum sounds like dram, doesn't it? so quite a lot of puns there, and rather fun, you know, playful. And but also referring to the idea of like, just drum up a poem, will you?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, here it is.
That terrible thing that people do when they know you write poems.
Oh yeah.
Can you write one for my wedding? Can you do this?
Yeah, that's right. Can you write one for the wedding? Write one for a funeral.
Yeah, no, I've done that before.
Yeah, I have written poems for people to order in that sense, but it's this sort of sense of just drum one up, come on, let's have one, like a little number on the Joanna in the pub, So I thought it showed a sense of humour. So I thought that was great fun. So Leland Bardwell. Actually, I found a couple of interesting things. If anyone's interested in finding out more, there's actually an interview with her on the Irish Film Institute archive, 1999, where she talks about her background and her work, and that was very interesting. And also the obituary in the Irish Times when she died in 2016. So very interesting. Oh, yes. So she was the founding editor of the journal Ciphers, which, as far as I know, is still going.
Yeah.
So that was in 1975 that started, together with 3 other people, Elaine Nichulinon, Piers Hutchinson and Macdara Woods. How about you, Peter? What are you going to tell us about today?
Well, it's quite a sensitive thing for me, really, because of interviewing Peter Daniels, which I really enjoyed doing. I went back to my old friend Timothy Gallagher, who died in about 1997, and looked at some of his monologues. And he used to do these spellbinding monologues delivered under all kinds of weird circumstances in a kind of very dry, deadpan and funny way.
Right.
Unfortunately, he died. He was a bisexual man, and he got married towards the end of his life to a woman called Hosser, and they had an amazingly strong bond. And actually, both of them, when they got married, were told they didn't have very long to live.
Oh, gosh.
But they exceeded the estimate by, quite a lot of time. Tim lived for another 2 years afterwards when he was told, he'd be lucky to reach 6 months. And anyway, he produced these amazing monologues. And so I'd like to read one of those. And I helped him produce a book in his last days, which is called Narcissus Goes A-Courting. He had this kind of very... it's typical title for him of this sort of narcissistic thing of being very interested in yourself, but also keen to kind of encounter other people. But I opened up the book, which I had for a while, and I found inside it a pamphlet by Peter Daniels, writing as Peter Daniels Lisinski, which Peter had sent me some years ago. And in it is a poem about Timothy Gallagher. So I thought, well, what I'll do is read one of Timothy's monologues and then read Peter's poem about Timothy.
Perfect.
So this is a monologue he wrote towards the end of his life called Alexander. And it's sort of in the context of him struggling with symptoms of AIDS and also being very much part of, connected to that gay community still in London. And also about not taking yourself too seriously. He conceived in a humorous fashion a passionate dislike of whales because there was all this save the whale business, and he said used to moan about whales and their regressive whining. That give you a sort of clue to his personality. But anyway, this is called Alexander. This morning I picked up a copy of Capital Gay, and glancing through the small ads section, I suddenly found myself reading what sounded like Alexander's obituary. Jesus wants me for a sunbeam, it began. This was in inverted commas. Presumably, it's a quote. Yes, of course it is. It's from some hymn, isn't it? The sort of hymn the little children sing at Sunday school. Who wrote it, I wonder? I imagine some 19th century Christian hippie who did not believe in death. But why was it in Alexander's obituary? Perhaps he quoted it on his deathbed. Well, if he did, let's hope he was being ironic. Yes, he was being ironic. Perhaps he quoted it at one of his dinner parties, just another throwaway line for another chorus of sniggers. Yes, I can see him now at his glass-topped table, being flippant, attracted to the idea of moving at 186,000 miles per second. Jesus wants me for a sunbeam. You can put that in my obituary, he might have said. And his friends, who presumably composed this notice, took him at his word. Were they being ironic? Or were they in earnest? and they must have been in earnest when they followed it with the phrase, deeply missed. Then they followed it with a list of themselves, 7 of them in all, the 7 friends of Alexander. As for myself, not being numbered among them, I was not consulted when it came to choosing the most telling thing to say. Now, had it have been left up to me, just imagine. For starters, I would not have had it in the small lads section, and certainly not in skimming distance of the small lad rates. I mean, there I was this morning, quite prepared to feel bereaved, almost in the mood to be meditating on human fragility, when suddenly I am sidetracked by the information, 45p a word. Well, of course I made my calculations. The 15 words that constituted Alexander's obituary worked out at £6.75, about 96p a friend. If only this obituary had been left up to me, it might have gone something like this. Had Alexander been deeply missed by more friends, this notice would have been dearer.
Very funny. I enjoyed that.
He was an amazing character. This phrase, Dr. Spotlight, a phrase used by actors when, you're feeling terrible and you get on stage and suddenly you're okay. And he would literally go from his hospital bed to do a performance on stage and perform brilliantly, and then literally have to go straight back to hospital. I mean, it was astonishing.
That's a sort of adrenaline or something that kind of sees you through that moment, I suppose.
Yeah. So I wanted to read Peter Daniels' poem about him. Peter was writing as Peter Daniels Lusinski at this point. His poem is Timothy. It's more than Jesus, Timothy. The moving Madonnas want you for a constellation. The lilies are piled up in vases, and your photo blown up and multiplied on screens. You're an unlikely angel, more like a street nutter with that shaved head. I don't mean to be personal. You were glad it didn't take years to swallow up your mind. Dementia might be poignant, but poignancy wasn't your style. Irony, as ever, is hard to escape in your world, Timothy. It takes possession of the room. Even the undertaker is chuckling, the deadpan pallbearers. Look, no hands. Out by the hearse in the car park, we let you go. The white balloons regroup and circle as they rise, the sky as blue and empty as you could wish. That's Timothy, we might think. Not in himself given to camp or mawkish gestures, he acknowledged them as a means to an effect. A constellation of balloons disappears upwards and northwards. Back in the room with the canapes, your photograph gives a satisfied nod.
Well, that is a lovely tribute, isn't it?
It's also amazing for me because he's describing Timothy's funeral, which of course I was at. Tim had left instructions that his funeral, it was billed as the last performance of Timothy Gallagher. It was very stage managed from beyond the grave.
Yeah. I liked that. And halfway through that line, I don't mean to be personal, saying about him having a bald head, but it's just a really sort of tender aside, I don't mean to be personal, and here's this beautiful personal tribute.
Being able to remember things is a marvellous boon, isn't it?
Oh,
sadly,
it is, yeah.
Sadly, we forgot our recording equipment and microphone when we zoomed up to London together earlier this week.
And why were we going up to London?
The National Poetry Competition winners
for
2024. Obviously, it's named for the preceding year, which I always find a bit confusing, to be honest.
Yes, I do too, but I suppose that's just the way it is, isn't it? Yeah, so, which of course is international in scope. People send their poems from all over the world, and this year they had a bumper crop. What was it? Over 22,000 poems submitted, and they were all read by at least one of the 3 judges. I don't know if they still do it this way, but I think it used to be that they each read 2/3 of the entries. So there's a bit of overlap. So they don't each read all of them, but they still have to read a heck of a lot of poems, and they don't have any sifters, which is quite good, I think, quite a big thing.
It was lovely to be there at the Art Workers Guild Hall in Queen Square. I'd never been in there. We walked into that room and it was all chock full of poets and poetry fanciers. On the walls, there was all mostly Victorian-looking men glowering down from portraits.
Yeah, but then actually, the other end of the room, there were all the more recent portraits, weren't they? And there were quite a lot of women amongst them. So things changed in later years. But yeah, there was this sense of walking into one of these lovely London Victorian institutions.
Yeah. And there were people drifting around with little trays of canapes.
Canapes and a little bit of drink. And it was all very, very lovely, wasn't it?
And the readings were great, weren't they? I mean, there was 10 poets, first, second and third, plus another 7 that were
commended. Yeah.
I was thinking while I was listening to it, it was like an open mic. Obviously it wasn't, but one of those things where you get 10 poets all coming up, but they're all reading excellent poems. So
that's amazing. Amazing. But the Poetry Society produces a lovely pamphlet of a winner's anthology. So we were given that as we left, weren't we? So we could then go away and read the poems on the page.
Yeah. One of the people that impressed me most was the poet Sorrel Briggs won 3rd prize, but she had COVID. So luckily enough, she had a twin sister who stepped in.
What are the odds? What are the odds?
and performed her sister Sorrel's poem very brilliantly. But she did make a remark about, if you're wondering what Sorrel looks like, she looks very much like me. The winner was Fiona Larkin.
Da, 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 da. That was such a lovely moment. Fiona Larkin, no way! Someone I actually know, and all the rest of it. And, oh, come on, we've got to say it. Published by Pindrop Press, who are publishing my collection next month. Oh, yes. So
Pindrop Press is the sign of quality, isn't it?
I know. I'm just like, I'm waiting for that gold dust to start falling onto me next.
Her poem was very successful, I thought.
The idea of missing, it was when her son was going to be moving to Australia.
It's called Absence Has a Grammar, and it blended together a sort of quirk of the Finnish language with realising how much she missed her son. She stirred it all together and it made a perfect poem.
It appealed to me as, linguistics was my subject at university, so I rather like the idea of a poem with words in it like abessive case and suffix. No, very, very beautiful. And blimey, having to say those Finnish words as well in the poem was quite impressive.
She did that with great confidence, I thought.
Great panache. I don't know if anyone in the room knew whether they were correctly pronounced or not, but it didn't matter what one iota, did it?
Anyway, it was a jolly good night out.
It was.
Despite us having to sprint off early to get our trains back to the sticks.
Always the way, the Cinderella moment of anything in London is like, is Southern Rail going to actually fulfil their commitment of providing a train to get us home?
We left our glass slippers on the floor.
Bye, got to run.
Sprinted away.